In the spring of 1846, 87 ordinary American families made a decision that would haunt history forever. They chose a shortcut to California that promised to save them time and distance. Instead, it led them into the most horrifying survival story ever documented in American history. What you're about to hear is not fiction. This is the true account of how civilization crumbled in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where desperate people crossed lines that should never be crossed. The Donner Party didn't just face starvation, they discovered how thin the boundary truly is between humanity and something far darker. The year 1846 marked the height of American westward expansion. California represented the ultimate dream: fertile land, perfect climate, and endless opportunity. Among those captivated by this vision were George Donner, a successful 62-year-old farmer from Illinois, and James Reed, a wealthy furniture maker with political ambitions. Both men had everything to lose, yet they risked it all for the promise of something greater. The traditional route to California was well established but long, following the Oregon Trail before branching south. Then came Lansford Hastings, a self-proclaimed guide who published a book promoting what he called the Hastings Cutoff. This route, he claimed, would save travelers 300 miles and several weeks of travel time. What Hastings failed to mention was that he had never actually traveled this route with wagons. George Donner was elected captain of what would become known as the Donner Party. The group consisted of multiple families: the Donners, the Reeds, the Breens, the Murphys, and others. They had livestock wagons loaded with supplies and unshakable faith in their decision. James Reed even brought a massive 2-story wagon he called his palace car, complete with a stove and comfortable sleeping quarters for his ailing wife, Margaret. At Fort Bridger in Wyoming, they faced their last chance to reconsider. Other travelers warned them against the Hastings route. Jim Kleiman, a mountain man who had actually traveled parts of the cutoff, specifically warned James Reed that the route was nearly impassable for wagons. Reed dismissed these warnings as jealousy and fear-mongering. The decision was made. They would take the shortcut. This single choice, born from optimism, ambition, and fatal overconfidence, set in motion a chain of events that would transform these respectable families into something unrecognizable. The Hastings Cutoff quickly revealed its true nature. Instead of the promised easy travel, the party encountered dense forests where they had to cut their own trail, inch by agonizing inch. Trees that would take hours to fell blocked their path daily. The shortcut was already taking longer than the traditional route, but the worst was yet to come. In August, they entered the Great Salt Lake Desert, 80 miles of barren, waterless wasteland under a merciless sun. Hastings had described this as a minor inconvenience, a day or two of difficult travel. Instead, it became a death trap. The alkali dust infiltrated everything, burning their eyes and throats. Oxen began dying from dehydration and exhaustion. Wagons broke down on the rough terrain, forcing families to abandon precious possessions. The Reeds lost their entire herd of cattle, leaving them dependent on the charity of others. James Reed's palace car, once a symbol of prosperity, was abandoned in the desert like a monument to their shattered dreams. What should have been a 2-day crossing stretched into 6 days of hell. When they finally emerged from the desert, they had lost precious livestock, supplies, and most critically, time. It was now early September, and they still faced the treacherous Sierra Nevada mountains. Winter was approaching, and they were woefully behind schedule. The group's morale shattered along with their supplies. Arguments broke out constantly. The stress of the journey began revealing the true character of each person, and not all of those revelations were pleasant. Trust, the foundation of their community, started cracking like the parched earth they had just crossed. What do you think about what you've seen so far? Could these families have made different choices that might have saved them? The story is about to take an even darker turn. By October, the Donner Party had reached the eastern slopes of the Sierra Nevada, near what is now called Lake Donner. They were exhausted, low on supplies, and racing against time. Early snow had already begun falling in the high passes, but they pressed on, believing they could make it through before winter truly set in. Then came the storm that changed everything. On October 28, 1846, a massive blizzard struck the Sierra Nevada with unprecedented fury. Snow fell continuously for days, accumulating at rates that made travel impossible. The passes that represented their gateway to California became walls of white death, 20 feet deep and growing. Trapped at the lake, the families faced a terrible reality. They would have to survive a Sierra Nevada winter with inadequate supplies and shelter. The men frantically built rough cabins using green pine logs and ox hides for roofs. These structures were barely more than hovels, offering minimal protection against the brutal cold. The Donner family, traveling behind the main group due to a broken wagon axle, was trapped 6 miles away at Alder Creek. They constructed even more primitive shelters, lean-tos covered with hides and canvas that provided almost no insulation against temperatures that regularly dropped below zero. Food became the dominant concern. They had entered the mountains with supplies meant to last a few weeks at most. Now, facing months of winter, they began rationing immediately. Meals shrank to a few ounces of dried meat and flour per person per day. The children cried constantly from hunger. As November turned to December, they consumed their remaining oxen and horses. When that meat ran out, they boiled ox hides to make a glutinous soup that barely sustained life. They scraped bark from trees and boiled it, creating a bitter substance that filled their stomachs but provided no real nutrition. The cold was relentless. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes. The poorly constructed shelters filled with smoke from inadequate fires, making breathing difficult. Children and elderly members of the party began showing signs of severe malnutrition. Their bodies were consuming themselves to stay alive. Thank you so much for staying with us this far into this incredible and tragic story. I know it's difficult to hear, but what's coming next will reveal the true depths of human desperation. The worst is yet to come. By December 1846, death had become a daily presence at the lake. The first to die was Bayless Williams, James Reed's hired hand, followed by the elderly and the children, those least equipped to fight starvation and cold. Each death was both a tragedy and a horrifying opportunity. The survivors faced an unthinkable decision. Around them lay the bodies of their friends, family members, and companions. Meanwhile, they were slowly starving to death, their bodies consuming muscle and organ tissue to survive. The mathematics of survival became brutally simple. They could die with their moral principles intact, or they could cross the ultimate taboo to live another day. The first to break was the Forlorn Hope, a group of 15 people who attempted to walk out of the mountains in mid-December. After 6 days in the wilderness, their food gone, Patrick Dolan died of exposure. The surviving members made the decision that would define the Donner Party forever. They consumed Dolan's flesh to survive. Back at the lake, similar scenes were unfolding. When 8-year-old Jacob Donner died, his starving family faced the same impossible choice. Survival won over sentiment. They carefully prepared and consumed the child's body, weeping as they did so, but unable to stop. It was no longer about want. It was about the primal drive to see another sunrise. The psychological toll was devastating. Parents who had crossed this line found themselves looking at their surviving children differently. Spouses began to eye each other with a calculation that would have been unthinkable months earlier. The social bonds that defined civilization had dissolved completely. Some, like the Breen family, held out longer than others, sustained by slightly better supplies and luck. But as bodies piled up outside their cabin doors, even they eventually succumbed to the grim necessity. They developed rules and rituals around their cannibalism, never consuming someone from their own family, always saying prayers, treating the deceased with as much dignity as possible under the circumstances. The most horrifying aspect wasn't the act itself, but how quickly it became routine. What had once been unthinkable became daily survival strategy. They learned which parts of the human body provided the most nutrition, how to preserve the meat in the snow, how to make it more palatable. They had become something that their former selves would not have recognized. In February 1847, the first rescue party finally reached the lake. What they found defied description. The cabins were nearly buried under snow, with only the roofs visible. Smoke holes in the white landscape marked where human beings still clung to life below. The rescuers descended into a scene from hell. Skeletal figures emerged from the darkness, hollow-eyed, barely human in appearance, their clothes hanging like rags on emaciated frames. Around the cabins, human bones and body parts were scattered casually, evidence of what these people had done to survive. James Reed, who had been banished from the party months earlier after killing another man in a fight, was among the rescuers. He found his wife Margaret and their children alive, though barely recognizable. The reunion was joyful but haunting. These were not the same people who had left Illinois months ago. The rescue took place in multiple expeditions throughout the spring of 1847. Each party that reached the lake found fewer survivors, but more evidence of the horror that had unfolded. Some survivors were too weak to travel and had to wait for subsequent rescue attempts. Others had descended so far into madness and desperation that they barely seemed human anymore. 47 people survived the ordeal. 40 died in the mountains. But for the survivors, the nightmare was far from over. Word of what had happened spread quickly across the country. The Donner Party became synonymous with the ultimate breakdown of civilization, a cautionary tale about the thin veneer of humanity. Many survivors changed their names and moved far from California to escape the stigma. They rarely spoke of their experiences even to their children and grandchildren. The psychological scars ran too deep. Some, like Louis Kieseberg, were accused of murder and cannibalism beyond what was necessary for survival, though the truth of these accusations remains disputed. The location of their suffering was eventually named Donner Lake, ensuring that their story would never be forgotten. Today, it's a popular tourist destination, though few visitors fully comprehend the horror that unfolded beneath the beautiful mountain scenery. The story of the Donner Party forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature. How far would you go to survive? At what point does the will to live override every moral principle you've ever held? These 87 people didn't set out to become monsters. They were ordinary families pursuing the American dream. Yet when faced with the ultimate test, they discovered that the line between civilization and savagery is far thinner than any of us would like to believe. Their story serves as a reminder that we are all capable of both great nobility and unthinkable horror, depending on the circumstances we face. What do you think? Could you have made different choices in their situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. But remember, it's easy to judge from the comfort of your warm home with a full refrigerator nearby. If this story captivated you, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more dark chapters from American history. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. And if you want to dive deeper into the psychology of survival, check out our next video about the most shocking maritime disaster that pushed sailors to similar extremes. The Donner Party's legacy lives on, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a mirror reflecting the depths of human desperation and the price we're willing to pay to see another day.